So my name is Caterina Calsamiglia, and I'm a research professor at CEMFI, which is located in Madrid, in Spain. I've been always interested on issues of equality of opportunities, and in particular in how policy can affect those opportunities. And I've mostly focused on education because I think it's a fundamental instrument through which societies can actually affect these equalities of opportunities. And in the last years, I've focused mostly on school choice. School choice is a fascinating topic because it has lots of theory behind it. You need to understand the incentives that families, that schools, that all these different agents will have to understand the implications of the different design problems. So I think it's very nice to come to it from an economics perspective because we do have some tools that are very useful. But I also think there's a need to actually broaden up the field and let other disciplines come to it and speak to it as well. Okay, so in the last decades, 2/3 of OECD countries have expanded the capacity of parents to have a say on the school that their children should be attending. And one of the issues is that school systems have basically fixed capacity. So schools have a given capacity at a given point in time. And so parents' preferences are not going to necessarily be fulfilled because there's not enough capacity for each parent's preferences to be satisfied. And so as a seminal paper by Abdulkadiroglu and Sermet shows in 2003, actually the way you actually resolve this dilemma of how to actually assign people according to their preferences given that capacity is fixed turns out to be a market design problem that is of large interest. So what most countries have done is to ask parents to submit a list, a ranking of preferences, and then they have some norms that basically will determine where children go to school, okay? And the two important factors are usually everybody's given sort of their first choice, and if there's over demand for a given school, children or applicants are ranked according to some priorities that the government sets. So for example, people who live in the neighborhood should go first, or families with economic disadvantages should go first, or so on and so forth. And then people are ranked in this manner. Their preferences are satisfied first, and those who don't have enough, those for whom there's not enough capacity in a given school, they're basically rejected and they can opt for some of the other schools that they have submitted in the ranking. What happens though, and as Abdulkadiroglu and Sermet show, is that depending on what you do with those people who are rejected from their first round and how you allow them to be reassigned into other school has a huge impact on what parents will submit as a preferences, okay? So parents will exclude some schools from their list and will not be telling you what they really would want to, the schools they would really want to go to, even though by reporting them, they could often be assigned to those schools. But just there's risks attached to it, and they may not have incentives to actually apply for those schools. So what I've been emphasizing with my recent research is that not only will parents exclude some schools that they don't like, but actually some families may not apply for any of the schools that they like, but just apply for the school that they are given priority for. So as I said, when there's over demand for a school, people are ranked according to some priorities, and parents will, with the more often used mechanism, which is called the Boston mechanism, not only will parents not tell you the truth, but they will systematically just apply for the school that they have priority for, okay, independently of their preferences. And so we show the challenge in proving that is the case is that you don't see preferences. And so we exploit a change in policy in Barcelona that happened in 2007, where the neighborhood design was changed systematically, and we see that families systematically changed what they applied for, thereby showing that these priorities that order the applicants when there's over demands has a huge impact on what parents will apply for. So that's one thing. The other thing that I've been emphasizing also is that the alternative mechanism, so sort of everybody has seen that this Boston mechanism is not very well functioning. So an alternative mechanism has been used, which is called the deferred acceptance Gale-Shapley. And what I've also showed with some theoretical research is that if in a school system there's some schools that are generally perceived as bad, which one could think of this so-called F schools, the failing schools. With this Gale-Shapley mechanism, even though families can tell you the truth because the incentives are such that you will be telling the truth, the final assignment is such that families are just assigned to their neighborhood school, independently of what the preferences are, just because of this common agreement on what the worst schools are. Okay, so overall, with a set of papers that I've worked on in the last 5 years, bottom line is these priorities, which were just a tiebreaker to resolve these overdemands, turn out to have a huge impact in the final allocation of children to school, either by affecting what families apply for or by affecting the assignment just because of the way the mechanism works. So two things come up. One is these priorities by the literature have been viewed as something exogenous, something that is given to the designer. So we just have to follow these priorities. But then these priorities are determined by exactly the same people who determine the mechanism. And so there's no reason to think that the government is not designing those priorities with some alternative objective. So what I'm trying to say is that this literature has perceived the problem of school choice as one where we want to satisfy parents' preferences, but it seems like, and it seems reasonable to think that the government may actually care about something else. There may be externalities in individual choice, there may be commuting costs in the city, there may be tons of reasons why the government doesn't only care about parents' preferences, and if that was the case, the instrument that they could use to implement what they would prefer to would be those priorities. So I think the line of research that needs to be carried out now, and that I'm actually focusing on myself, is understanding where these priorities come from. What kind of objective function does the social planner have, the government have? What kind of externalities are they concerned about? Do they care about segregation? Do they care about commuting costs in the city, congestion? What is it that they care about? And so we're trying to understand how those priorities are determined and how they're shaped by these preferences. Another thing that this literature has sort of ignored and that we're trying to advance in is understanding that schools are not an object that is given, but that actually who is assigned to a given school greatly determines the quality of that school. And so in some sense, the mechanism itself can affect school quality, school segregation patterns, and the like. So one of the things we've done is endogenize school quality and say, what if the school quality is affected by peers, so who is there? And we see that the mechanism itself and the priorities themselves can greatly affect the segregation that we observe in neighborhoods and in schools. Okay, so for instance, the well-known Boston mechanism without priorities for neighborhood or anything will actually lead to segregation in schools, because the mechanism itself allows for this kind of coordination process. And similarly, if you have either the Boston mechanism or the Gale-Shapley, which are the mostly used mechanisms, in both instances, if you have neighborhood priority, you're basically going to end up with people assigned to their neighborhood school and people living in the neighborhood. There's going to be segregation in neighborhood and everybody just going to their neighborhood school. So segregation will happen anyways, and the channel through which it would happen, it will be the housing market. So another thing that we show is that when you broaden the school market and incorporate the private schools into the model, you actually find that those families who can afford a private school, for whom that option of a private school is an attractive one, they can actually play very differently the game of school choice And in particular, having a private school is not only going to allow those families who can have that option play very differently, and they actually have much higher chances of getting the better school, but it will also facilitate segregation even further within the school system. Okay, so those families who have this outside option will play a lot more aggressively and will actually facilitate them getting the best schools in the public system, which is a different source of inequality that is very exceptional, because it's the fact that you can afford private schools that allows you to get the best public schools for which you don't have to pay for. So having more money to sort of buy better goods, that's something that we all understand happens, but the fact that you could actually that you would be willing to pay for something yourself allows you to get better access to public resources. That's a novel source that I think is also very important from the research that we've worked on in the last years. Okay, so bottom line is that when you start endogenizing all these ingredients that affect the priorities and affect the school quality, you see that the mechanism itself is actually affecting the school quality that we observe. So these are so in some sense, school choice has been separated out as an assignment problem, sort of ignoring the reality that is attached to it. For instance, that if you're given priority for neighborhood, actually choosing your residence is going to affect your priorities. So these priorities are not exogenous. Or school quality being taken as exogenous when we know that school quality to a large extent depends on your peers. We're trying to incorporate all these things so that actually the school choice problem is embedded into the more into the broader reality of what the school market looks like. And that is my main focus. That has been my main focus in the last 5 years, and I think will be the focus of my next 3 or 4 years too.